So we're picking up now in Genesis 41. Last time we met, we finished off with Joseph at his lowest point, with after being accused, after being sold by his brothers. Things are going well. He's up. Potiphar takes him in and trusts him with everything until Potiphar's wife slanders him because he refuses her. And so he's thrown into prison. And there he is also kind of on the rise again. He remembers the Lord is with him, and the prison guard sort of trusts him with all these responsibilities and lifts him to a high position, so that he places him, if you remember, in a house with the chief baker and the chief butler of Pharaoh. And he interprets their dreams. And if you remember how he left it last time, he said something after he interprets the butler and the baker's dreams, which come true. The butler's restored, the baker is put to death. He has a request for the butler as he's leaving, if you remember.
Remember me?
Yeah. It was on the third day of Pharaoh's birthday, and he tells him, oh shoot, I lost my place again. Back in chapter 40, he says this interpretation, and after he interpreted positively the butlers, he says, remember me when it works out for you. Remember me and mention me to Pharaoh. Get me out of this house, for you've stolen out of the land. But we are told at the end that what happens, the end of chapter 40.
He forgot him.
He forgot him. Yeah, he didn't remember him. He forgot him. So there he is. He's just forgotten, forsaken. And we find out, we begin chapter 41, that it will be for 2 years he'll be there. So let's pick it up there, chapter 41, verses 1 to 8. Rob Roy, would you start us off here?
Okay. After 2 whole years, Pharaoh dreamed that he was standing by the Nile, and behold, there came up out of the Nile 7 cows, attractive and plump, and they fed in the reed grass. And behold, 7 other cows, ugly and thin, came up out of the Nile after them, and stood by the other cows on the bank of the Nile. And the ugly, thin cows ate up the 7 attractive, plump cows. And Pharaoh awoke, and he fell asleep and dreamed the second time, and behold, 7 ears of corn, plump and good, were growing on one stalk. And behold, after them sprouted 7 ears, thin and blighted by the east wind. And the thin ears swallowed up the 7 plump, full ears. And Pharaoh awoke, and behold, it was a dream. So in the morning his spirit was troubled, and he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt and all its wise men. Pharaoh told them his dreams, but there was none who could interpret them to Pharaoh.
Okay. So let's get a little timeline for this. We're told after 2 years, and let's see, there's a little bit later on in the story where it said that it was, let me see if we're told here. Yeah, in verse 46, later on, we're told that Joseph was 30 years old when he entered the service of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. So let's try to get a timeline here. We have, remember how old Joseph was when he was sold into slavery?
17.
17 years old, Joseph sold into slavery. We're told later on that 30 is when Joseph enters Pharaoh's service. And then you've got, he's going to be 37 because 7 years when the famine comes. Famine arrives. Okay. And then it'll be another 7 years after that for that. So 2 years before that, so he is
20 years older.
So he's 28 when the dreams, Joseph interprets the dreams for the butler and baker. So yeah, so he's a good, he's 13 years there in bondage, and things go well, and then in prison. But 2 years he's left in that house, and I don't know how long he was in the prison, but that was probably a couple of years before that too. So it's a quick timeline of that. So let's get to Pharaoh's dream. So now it's 2 years later, Pharaoh has a dream. And let's talk.
AOA chat.
There we go. I always spell his name wrong. Let's talk about Pharaoh's dream. What are some of the details that we're given about this?
7 plump cows and 7 gaunt cows.
All right. So his first dream. Oh shoot. Lost my thing here. Hang on. I'm gonna have to. All right, we're back. All right, so this is Pharaoh's first dream. We'll start with that. And the starts with the location. What's the location of it here?
Along the Nile.
The Nile.
Okay, so Pharaoh is standing by the Nile. And what happens first?
Seven.
Seven.
Come out
Go
of
on.
it.
Yeah.
No, the 7 fat, healthy cows come out.
Okay, 7 fat, healthy cows. Come out of the Nile.
Mm.
And fed on the
Mm,
wheat grass. Okay. Good. And then what happens after that?
7
Seven ugly thin cows.
Yeah. 7 ugly, thin cows
Oh.
come up.
And stood by the cows, the healthy cows.
And stood by the cows. Okay. On the bank of the Nile. And then, of course, what happens next?
the ugly eat the pretty.
7 ugly, thin cows eat. 7 fat, plump, attractive cows. Okay. That's his first dream. Now, notice a couple things about this. We're familiar with the story, but one thing that's emphasized, if you notice as we're reading through it, this is mentioned not once, but 4 times. I don't know if you noticed it, regarding the location of all these activities here. Story is all, it's about, it's not just that he sees 7 cows and then 7 other cows eating those 7 cows, but it's a special emphasis on where this is happening.
By the Nile.
It's by the Nile. Okay. And what is the Nile?
The river, but it's also one of their gods.
It is one of their gods, yeah, but it's their, what's the significance of the Nile to the,
It's their life. That's how they can grow their food.
yeah,
That's without the Nile, they don't exist there.
yeah, it's absolutely the source of life in Egypt. I mean, if you look at all their cities, they're all along the Nile. I mean, just up and down. It becomes a god to them. And so that's why later on, when you have the Nile being turned to blood, what an act of judgment that is against the land. This is a source of life for them. And so all these things are happening in a horrible scene of fat and healthy cows coming out of the Nile. That in a sense is like, yes, I mean, if it's a weird dream, but it's sort of symbolic of what the Nile is to them. Brings health and fatness and beauty comes out of the Nile. It's the second part that's very troubling, that now you have something ugly and gaunt and death coming out of the Nile. And and death not only coming out of the Nile, but winning the day so that it devours the life that came out before that. So that's his first dream. And then he has a second dream. Let's look at that. And what happens in the second dream?
7 ears of grain, plumping good.
Okay. Now he's looking at. All right. He dreams the second time. There's 7 ears of grain. Plump and good. And growing
On one stalk.
on one stalk. Okay, we get a picture of that. Just one stalk with 7 ears of grain that are plump and good. And after them, what happens?
Another stalk rises up full of sickly ears of grain.
So now you have 7 ears of the sickly grains that we described it as.
Mm,
It says thin ears in the NASB, but
Thin and
Thin.
Blighted.
and blighted by the east wind. What's the east wind about?
evil.
Evil. Everything out of the east is bad.
True, east is bad. Yeah. What is east of Egypt?
Desert.
In the desert.
Yeah, that's the desert. So it's a desert wind. That's true. The desert is also a picture of evil and death, and that's where the demons dwell in the deserts. It's a godforsaken place. So there we have that. And then the thin, again, the 7 thin ears swallow up the 7 plump ears. Okay. And that's all we're told there. So we have these 2 scenes, one of the water and the life, and then one of bread and grain. And Pharaoh is troubled by this. And I think it's there's a double dream. He doesn't know what it means, but I think he can tell it's the same basic message here. It's something with 7 and something that is wonderful and beautiful being devoured by something that is horrifying and death and cursed. And what it all means, but having it twice, I think, is the reason he is greatly troubled by this.
Mm.
So what does he do?
Calls for his magicians and his wise men.
Calls for his magicians. Now the magicians is not, like the pull a rabbit out of a hat guy kind of magicians. It's another phrase that we would use in the New Testament is the Magi. These are sort of your wise men, your counselors, your spiritual counselors, who would be able to interpret. These are the guys who have a connection to the supernatural. Some of them are frauds, but some of them have a real connection to the supernatural because the Bible talks about the gods and that there are these spiritual beings that some in rebellion to God who connect with mankind, and they have their priests and they have kind of powers. But what we see is what happens with the dream, and when he presents it to his magicians and his wise men.
They couldn't interpret it.
Yeah. None could interpret Pharaoh. That's interesting. So you can see they're kind of useless. So when God, in the story of Joseph, God is revealing, as he's done throughout Genesis, his word through dreams. But for wise men, for the For the wisdom of this world, for those of other gods, they can't understand it. It must, Joseph, who is the prophet, will come and explain in just a minute. So let's pick it up there. Verses 9 to 13.
It's
Elizabeth?
interesting, it's interesting that there's 7.
Yeah,
You mentioned the fact that, this is almost like this is from the God of Israel, not
Yeah.
your phony gods,
Yeah.
there's not.
Mm,
yeah, that's a good point to mention. Is that as a note, we know that 7 is, how should we say this? It's
Number of
God's, it's
God's number.
number of it's a 7th day, like in creation, and it's of completion. And so this is something coming from God, like we saw when we went through Revelation. Everything happens in 7s. This is from God when it comes in 7s like this. So when you see the wrath of God being poured out, this is not a man-made thing. This stream here is something that is from God, and we'll see what it means. So, Elizabeth, you want to read verses 9 to 13?
Sure. Then the chief cupbearer said to Pharaoh, I remember my offenses today. When Pharaoh was angry with his servants and put me and the chief baker in custody in the house of the captain of the guard, we dreamed on the same night, he and I, each having a dream with its own interpretation. A young Hebrew was there with us, a servant of the captain of the guard. When we told him, he interpreted our dreams to us, giving an interpretation to each man according to his dream. And as he interpreted to us, so it came about. I was restored to my office, and the baker was hanged.
Let's do a little what if game here for a second. What if the dreams that were interpreted were reversed? That the cupbearer was the one who was killed and the baker the one who was restored. Would that change the story at all?
Well, the baker would have been in a kitchen, whereas the cupbearer would have been present with the Pharaoh.
Yeah.
So,
Cupbearer is important because he's the one handing the food to Pharaoh. He's in Pharaoh's presence all the time. The baker would not be in Pharaoh's presence. It's the cupbearer who would have noticed the distress of Pharaoh, who would have noticed his trouble, and is concerned about that. And so it's by God's divine appointment that the one who is spared and restored is the cupbearer, who can then put 2 and 2 together, that we have Pharaoh troubled by a dream, and there was this Hebrew that interpreted dreams. So, and none of your guys can do it, so let's put this together. But only he could be in that position to connect the dots. The baker would not have been accessible like that. The baker would have been off baking in the kitchen. He would have had limited interaction with Pharaoh. But the cupbearer is constantly with him. So the cupbearer remembers now, and his offenses even. And he tells Pharaoh about
the young Hebrew,
how does he describe Joseph?
young Hebrew.
About a young Hebrew. Is there someone beeping a horn up?
No, it's my son. He just came home.
Oh, that's you. Okay, I thought it might be me. Okay.
He's sure that the raccoons and bears are going to steal his car, so he doubled.
Money. Nice. So a young Hebrew who interpreted his dreams, and he just recounts the whole situation to him. Exactly what he had said came true, and so he tells it to Pharaoh. All right, we can pick it up from there. I think verse 14 to let's see, Liz, would you get verse 14 down to 24? Let's do that.
Sure. Then Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they quickly brought him out of the pit. And when he had shaved himself and changed his clothes, he came before the Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, I have had a dream, and there is no one who can interpret it. I have heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. Joseph answered Pharaoh, It is not in me. God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, Behold, in my dream, I was standing on the banks. You can go all the way up.
Yeah.
I was standing on the banks of the Nile. 7 cows, plump and attractive, came up out of the Nile and fed in the reed grass. 7 other cows came up after them, poor and very ugly and thin, such as I'd never seen in all the land of Egypt. And the thin, ugly cows ate up the first 7 plump cows. But when they had eaten them, no one would have known that they had eaten them, for they were still as ugly as at the beginning. Then I awoke. I also saw in my dream 7 ears growing on one stalk, full and good. 7 ears withered, thin, and blighted by the east wind sprouted after them. And the thin ears swallowed up the 7 good ears. And I told it to the magicians, but there was only one who could explain it. And there was no one that could explain it to me.
Okay, so what happens here? So the cupbearer tells Pharaoh, I remember now my offenses. I forgot about this guy, but there's this Hebrew. He's in the prison, and he could interpret our dreams. So what happens next? Verse 14.
Pharaoh calls for Joseph.
All right, so Pharaoh calls for Joseph.
Before they bring him, they have to clean him up and shave him.
Yeah. Notice what it says about Joseph's situation. Where do they
Out of the pit.
Out of the pit.
Joseph? And they quickly bring him out of the pit,
The NASB says the dungeon.
the dungeon. But we were told he was in a house last time we saw him.
Yeah.
So it's in a sense, I think, emphasizing his misery that he has been, whether he probably was in a pit in a dungeon for a time or in the house, but this whole experience for him is like these last 13 years, he's been in a pit. He has been far from home, forsaken, completely abused, and except that the Lord was taking care of him along the way. He has been completely vulnerable and abused and oppressed, unrighteously so. So they bring him out of the pit and shave him and change his clothes. So Joseph is shaved and changed his clothes. Okay. So you can tell right here, this is sort of the turning point of his story. You have this is why the Joseph story is so important. It tracks right alongside the story of Christ, where you have the beloved son of the Father, who is in an exalted place at the beginning of the story, where he is given the coat of many colors. He's honored and loved above his brothers. But then he is betrayed by his brothers. He's sold as a slave. He's basically handed over to death. He is then handed over to the Gentiles, where he is falsely accused and condemned, sent to a prison, basically to his death, sent to the pit. But then he is raised, and he is brought out of the pit. He is shaved and clothed, and then he will soon be exalted to the highest place in the land. And the exact story of Christ from Philippians, right, where he says, he, though in very nature God, did not consider equality something to be grasped, but he made himself nothing. He became a servant, obedient to death on a cross, betrayed by his brothers, handed over by the Jews, the Gentiles, crucified, buried, but then he's raised. And this is beginning now of his vindication, his exaltation. Now we see the story turns now. And so that is very symbolic, the way that he is quickly brought out of the pit and shaved and changed. Like this is just the language. Why add those details? I think to emphasize the turn in the story, that he is now one who's been humiliated all along will now be exalted. So Pharaoh explains the dream, tells the dream, right? Repeats it again. So we heard the twofold dream now told to us just like it did before. He tells the dreams. And the point he makes at the end is, after telling the dreams, he makes the very point at the very end.
Magicians could not explain it.
Yeah. Dreams. And the fact that his magicians cannot explain it.
Even before Joseph tells explains the dream, or before he's even told what the dream is, he tells Pharaoh that he can't interpret it, but God will give him the interpretation.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, so Joseph clarifies that it is not in him to interpret dreams. This is from God.
That's something that Christ does too. He's always referring back to his Father, glorifying statements about his Father.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, Jesus, so many times he say, apart from me, what does he say? That I can do nothing apart from the Father. He does everything through me. This is all glory to him. Joseph comes as the prophet. That this is how the prophets speak. When the prophets speak, they don't say, I have a dream. They say, thus says the Lord. This is the Lord speaking. He reveals himself through dreams to me, but it's the Lord's word. The Lord will give the definition. It's not in me. I'm nothing special except that I am in the Lord's hands. I remember, what was it? Francis Schaeffer wrote a great little book called No Little People, No Little Places, I think it's called. And he talks about the story of Moses. And at the beginning of the story, Moses has a staff. And the staff that Moses has is just a staff. It can do nothing that only what a staff can do. You know, you can walk with it, you can guide the sheep with it. Until the Lord basically has him throw it down, and then it becomes the staff of the Lord. And so it's the same staff, but now in the Lord's hand, it can turn into snakes. It can part waters. It can turn the Nile to blood. And Moses does almost everything that he does with this staff. But it's not called the staff of Moses anymore. It's the staff of the Lord that's in Moses' hand. Joseph kind of is like that. He's just a staff. He's nothing. But it's the Lord who will use him to interpret. And I love that. And I think that's one of the great signs, a consistent sign of the prophets is they do not glorify themselves. They're always pointing to God. When Peter and the apostles in the New Testament, when they do their miracles, they say the same things. Why are you looking at us like we did something out of our own power? This is Jesus. It's the Lord who did this healing. He's the one. You need him. So let's pick it up from there. 25 down to 36. We get now the interpretation. Bob Thomas, you want to get that for us?
Sure. Then Joseph said to Pharaoh, the dreams of Pharaoh are one. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good ears are 7 years. The dreams are one. The 7 lean and ugly cows that come up after them are 7 years, and the 7 empty ears blighted by the east wind are also 7 years of famine. It is as I told Pharaoh, God has shown to Pharaoh what he is about to do. There will come 7 years of great plenty throughout all the land of Egypt. But after them, there will arise 7 years of famine, and all the plenty will be forgotten in the land of Egypt. The famine will consume the land, and the plenty will be unknown in the land by reason of the famine that will follow. For it will be very severe. And the doubling of Pharaoh's dream means that the thing is fixed by God, and God will shortly bring it about. Now therefore, let the Pharaoh select a discerning and wise man and set him over the land of Egypt.
And verse 34.
Okay. Let the Pharaoh appoint an overseer of the land and take 1/5 of the produce of the land of Egypt during the 7 plentiful years, and let them gather all the food of these good years that are coming and store up grain until the authority of Pharaoh for food in the cities, and let them keep it. The food shall be a reserve for the land against the 7 years of famine that are to occur in the land of Egypt, so that the land may not perish through the famine.
Okay. All right, so we have the interpretation of the dream here. So Joseph interprets. He says a few things about these dreams. What's the first thing he says about them?
That both dreams are one.
Yeah, the dreams are one. And what's the next thing he says?
The 7 good cows and the 7 plump ears are 7 years.
Yeah, so it's about 7 years, but he says before that, he says in verse 25, the dreams are one, and in those dreams, what is happening? What are
Well,
the dreams?
God says what's about to happen.
God has revealed what he is about to do. So it's not that God is warning you about what's going to happen. It's God has revealed what he is about to do. This is from God. Hence, I think that's why the 7s are significant. This is something from God here, divine judgment. Famines were a common means in the law by which God judges people through the famines. That's one of his ways. And so this seems to be some kind of a judgment coming upon Egypt, but he is providing a means of salvation through this judgment. So this is what he's about to do. It's not just warning that, oh, there's global warming, there's going to be some kind of a climate crisis, or there's going to be, whatever. God is the one bringing the famine. So you don't need a warning about 7 years of plenty. I mean, that's just great. There's nothing to warn about that, but you do need a warning from 7 years of famine. So, this is God's judgment on the land of Egypt, on the world, you could even say, because it goes beyond Egypt, if you remember. But in this judgment, there is a means of escape. Through the word of God through Joseph. So let's see what he says here. So what is the judgment here? It's the 7. Well, first he says, what is the meaning of the 7 cows and the 7 ears of grain?
They're both 7 years. The first 7 years is the plentiful years, and then the second 7 years are the famine.
Yeah, there'll be 7 plentiful years, then 7 years of famine. And how bad will the famine be?
It'll wipe out everything that they have from the plentiful years.
Yeah, it will consume the land, and it will be so bad that the plenty will be forgotten. Because if you remember, that's how the dreams end. It's not just that you have 7 fat cows and 7 ugly cows. and that's the end of the dream. It's you have 7 fat cows being devoured by 7 thin cows, so that you have only thin cows left. And it's just that this is the judgment scene here. It's in a sense, God is warning them that in 7 years, judgment's coming. We have the 7 years of famine that will wipe out. But he is providing for those who will hear his word 7 years of plenty. If you heed my word, that will help you through that judgment. All right. And what is the point of the doubling of the dream? Why tell it twice?
Because it means it's fixed. It's going to happen.
Sizes.
It's almost like emphasis. You know, the Jews, they double. They say Martha, Martha as a means of emphasis.
Yes.
Amen,
It is-
amen.
it is- Go ahead.
I said, amen, amen, truly,
And
truly.
amen. Yeah, truly, truly. Yes. The meaning of double, it is fixed. It is, and God will bring it about shortly. It is fixed, and it will happen soon. So there's an emphasis and urgency in this.
Mm.
Tend to these things here. All right. So again, the dreams are not. The second dream doesn't add anything to the first dream. It's just emphasizing it, telling it a different way. Just like you see in Hebrew poetry all the time, the parallelism where you have the same theme, just told in a different way, but it's making the same point. We saw that, if you remember, in several scenes in Revelation, where he has visions that kind of are parallel visions of what he's been dealing with.
But when Joseph interprets the dreams, he adds a lot. I mean, God's giving him a lot more information than was even in the dream, because he's telling him what to do about it,
Yes.
how much to do it, and
Yeah.
everything.
Yeah. So it seems like the instruction, it's very similar to Noah's situation, where God is revealing to Noah what he's about to do, the judgment that's coming upon him, and then he gives him specific instructions of how to survive it. And so it's same thing here. Now we have the instructions for survival. What are the instructions?
Take
We'll
one.
call it.
Take 1/5 of the
Store
food.
food.
Yeah.
Mm.
Okay. Take 1/5 of a bountiful harvest.
Store it up.
Store it up. Okay. So basically you're going to take, the harvest is going to be so great that 1/5 of it each year will cover the 7 years. So you have I'm assuming he'll take 1/5 the first year, 1/5 the second year, third year, fourth year, fifth year, sixth year, seventh year. Every time there's a harvest, they'll take 20% of it, put it away, and that will cover us when the famine comes.
It's hard to believe that stuff does not rot. I mean,
Yeah.
Well,
rain 5 years.
yeah. Well, in Egypt, it's going to be dry, right? It's going to be, I think, preserved
We
better.
do that now. It's as long as they keep it from, as long as they prevent it from getting wet. If they dry it out enough and prevent it from getting wet, it won't rot.
Yeah. Yeah.
Expi-
So,
But
all right.
yeah,
So,
I was gonna say, the other interesting thing is that, okay, it's only 20% of this, of the good years will take care of all, like all 7 of the bad years, but not just for Egypt. Because they get people coming from everywhere to get,
Yeah.
because we know the rest of the story.
yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, they're going to have so much grain. They're probably going to sell it or trade it to other places. They're going to make a lot of money off this. The place is going to be very prosperous because they're not going to need it all. But if they know, okay, we got to store up a 1/5 of it. So I think like a bountiful harvest like that.
It's been
You know.
huge harvest, huge,
Yeah.
huge to be able to keep it that long. And the other thing I was thinking of is that he instructs them to give it to Pharaoh to keep it for the 7 famine years. He doesn't instruct each individual to put aside a fifth of it.
Yeah.
Plays into the future storyline of getting all the land.
Yes. And it's going to be important to do it this way. Why is it so important to do it so that Pharaoh has food and the
Well, his Joseph's family would not have come to Joseph. They'd have
Yes.
come to whoever to buy their stuff.
it's set up so that everyone will come to Pharaoh, and ultimately everyone will come to Joseph.
Yeah,
God is the one giving Joseph these instructions. This is not Joseph's plan. It's not like Joseph sat down and figured it out of how to deal with it. It's like this is just like God dealt with Noah. He not only divinely inspired and told Noah, hey, I'm going to bring a flood, and then Noah has to figure out how he's going to survive it. God gives him the plans of how to survive it. I think this is what's happening here. This is God's plan, that it's not Joseph, scheming for Pharaoh. This is God's plan so that ultimately Joseph, his chosen one, will be exalted and his brothers will come to him, just as God prophesied in Joseph's first dreams with his brothers coming to him. So it's
So this type of Christ saves them from the wrath. So
yeah. So salvation will come not from your own ingenuity and your own, ability to save and to put things away, save it for a rainy day, not to your own resourcefulness. Your salvation will come by going to the man that God has exalted, the man who was rejected by his brothers, hand sold to the Gentiles, and exalted to the highest place. That's the guy you go to if you want to be saved. And that's clearly what that's God's plan. Salvation so Pharaoh will be the one will have authority over foods, cities. Well, it does say the cities. Now it could be that in the cities you don't have the capacity to store up the food. If you're living in Memphis or what are the capitals of Egypt are? I know Memphis is one of them. Wasn't it? If
Cairo?
you're living, yeah, Cairo. You're living in one of these cities there. You don't have the land to store up the food like the farmers do. They have the capacity to store up and save up their own food, but in the cities, the grain needs to come under the authority of Pharaoh. Let them keep it as a reserve. Okay. A famine. All right. Let's pick it up there. 37 to 45. Bob Fowler, would you read that for us? Bob, you got that? Bob Fowler?
Yep. I'm just waiting for you to get in place there.
All right.
This
37.
proposal, please Pharaoh and all his servants. And Pharaoh said to his servants, can we find a man like this in whom the Spirit of God, whom is the Spirit of God? Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has shown you all this, there is none so discerning and wise as are you. You shall be over my house, and all my people shall order themselves as you command. Only as regards to the throne, I will be greater than you. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, see, I have set you over all the land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh took his signet ring from his hand and put it on Joseph's hand, and clothed him in garments of fine linen, and put a gold chain about his neck. And he made him ride in his second chariot. And they called out before him, bow the knee. Thus he sent him over all the land of Egypt. Moreover, Pharaoh said to Joseph, I am Pharaoh, and without your consent, no one shall lift up a hand or foot in all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh called Joseph's name Sephanath Paneah, and he gave him in marriage to Asenath, the daughter of Potipharah, priest of On. So Joseph went out over the land of Egypt.
Okay. So this is now Joseph's exaltation here. We have Pharaoh recognizes that we need a man in whom is the spirit of God, or I think the Hebrew could be translated the spirit of the gods, but clearly of supernatural wisdom. And Pharaoh says, since God has shown you all this, there's none as discerning as you are. And what does he do for him? So look at all the things that Pharaoh does for Joseph here.
Puts a signet ring on him.
Okay. Puts a signet ring.
It's his signet ring because he took it off his hand.
Oh, that's right. Puts his signet. What's the significance of that?
Isn't that what if you make an order, you seal it with a signet ring?
Yeah, he gives him all authority.
Yeah.
Interesting. All authority has been given to me.
Yeah, huh? You shall be over all my house. Placed over all Pharaoh's house, which is a lot, and all his people. Only in regards to the throne will I be greater than you.
You got to think, what's Potiphar's wife thinking right now?
What else did he say next for 41? 42, 42, he gets into the signet ring. What else does he do for him?
Puts fine garments of linen on him.
Pharaoh clothes him. Fine garments and a gold chain. Like the story's coming full circle here. Didn't it begin with, again, the father, Joseph the father, clothing him, giving him that special honor? He's been stripped of that. That whole thing of that symbolism of where he was. Remember the story? It's not just that he was sold into slavery, he was first stripped of his coat.
Yep.
And he's sent off, in rags or naked, however he was sent off. But he is stripped at the beginning of the story, and now he is clothed and gets a gold chain, and he's given the highest honors.
In effect, he's sent off in chains, and now he's wearing chains.
Yeah, it's good. There's a beautiful, there's a real poetry in the way the stories are put together, and now he is, all are commanded to bow the knee to Joseph. He's set over all the land of Egypt, and then he does something for him next, in verses 44 to 45.
Gets them hitched.
Yeah, first he changed his name.
Yep.
Pharaoh gives him a new name that would have been an exalted name in Egypt, and a new family. I got it here. So it gives him a new name and marries him into a highly respected family, being one of the priesthood. And so this is a whole new life here for him. I am Pharaoh, without your consent, no one shall lift up hand or foot in all the land of Egypt. He gives him, Joseph is given all authority over all the people. That's amazing that no one shall lift a hand or a foot in all the land of Egypt without your consent. So it becomes like a Kim Jong-il over there.
I think to get the full impact of all that's happening is you have to recall all these passages in the New Testament. Christ prayed, "Give me back the authority that I had with you from the beginning."
Yeah.
And Joseph gets this clothing bag, and all authority has been given to me. Joseph gets the signet ring.
Yeah.
The connection is, yeah.
It's a stunning story. It's really beautiful how it all comes around. I think we'll kind of pause it here because it's about 3:30.
I
But-
wanted to add before we move from here, I looked up the name that they gave him.
Yeah.
It is said that it means, says the God he will live.
Huh. That's for 45. Gives me a new name. The God he will live.
Yeah.
Huh.
It's a
Okay.
comma, the God, comma, he will live.
Nice. Great. So yeah, so everything is just coming around here, and this is the way of God as you see it. It's one of he is rejected, despised, forsaken by all, but God is with him. And then in due time, God exalts him to the highest place. That's the story of Joseph. It's the story of Christ. It's also our story as the church, as Christians, as those who are in Christ. We are crucified with Christ, and we suffer with him now so that we'll be exalted with him later. That our day is coming when he will exalt us with Christ as well. But in the meantime, we're still in that phase of Joseph's time in prison, waiting for the word to come true that he's been given. So, all right, why don't we break it here? Any last comments or thoughts about the text today? Okay.
When I was going through Job at my house, that Bible study, I mentioned to you that Job is very obviously a type of Christ. But I had missed so much. You said,
Yeah.
Did you notice that he prays for his friends?
Yeah.
That kind of resensitized my brain to look for the types, the things that picture Christ in the
Yeah.
rest of the story that I had missed. And the same is going on here.
Yeah.
You know, we say Joseph's a type of Christ, but I missed the coat to the
Yeah.
selling by his brothers, to the reclothing and that kind
Yeah.
of stuff.
Yeah. It's great. And you know, what I love about the story is it's especially how it ends, is there's a tenderness in the ending of it where he, of course, the question now is he's been given all this power, and the question is, what will he do with it? He has the power to get revenge. This could be the Count of Monte Cristo story where he's going to use that power to avenge himself against those who betrayed him, and we would be happy if he did that. That's a great story to get back at those scoundrels for what they did to him. But that's the beauty of the gospel, is that our Christ, he has been betrayed by us all. He rises to the highest place, and when we ask the question, what will he do now? With all that power, we are now at his feet, the one that we betrayed. What will he do? And he, like Joseph, as we'll see, forgives. And he is all who will come, he receives.
Have you heard that story? I heard it once, that by the smallest pyramid in Egypt, the earliest one, there are a series of pits, like really deep pits, and they're all set up so whatever's in all of them will drain into one lower one. And there's actually like there are people that fully believe that these were where they stored the grain.
Oh, wow.
And so that literally you would keep going down this one pit in the middle, and with stairs built into it around, fill your bags and take it out. And as it dropped, it would get fed by the others. So you only had to have one with stairs in it.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that. I don't know much about that archaeology. That's really interesting.
Yeah, I think it was something to do with what is it, Wyatt? The same guy that thinks that he found the Ark of the Covenant.
Interesting.
I think it was one of his things, but it's one of those things you hear it once, but now you don't get
Yeah.
confirmation.
No,
But I
that's
don't know if
interesting.
anyone else had.
Very interesting. I had not heard that. So great. All right. Well, we'll break it here.